Hello and welcome to another Show Me with Mr. Oliver. We're just about to look at finding quarters, 2/4 and 3/4 using arrays. Let's have a look and see what that looks like. Okay, so first thing you need to think about when you're thinking about a quarter is you're thinking about 1 out of every 4. So that's 1 out of every 4. And the best way to represent that is to use an array. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're talking about 1 out of every 4. What you'll end up doing then is sharing, which is also dividing by 4. Pardon me. Okay, so let's look at these questions to find a quarter of 8. If you set up your 8 circles, as I've done here, you can see I've got them in columns of 4, and we're looking at 1 out of every 4. So 1/4 of 8, as you can see, equals 2. 2/4 means not 1 out of every 4, but 2 out of every 4. So that's 2 out of the first 4 and 2 out of the second 4. Straight away you can see that 2/4 equals 4, which is equivalent to half of 8, which we'll talk about in a second. So 3/4 of 8, 1, 2, 3 out of those 4, and 1, 2, 3 out of those 4. Straight away you can see that 3/4 of 8 equals 6. And again, it's using the same array, the same pictorial, to find 1/4, 2/4, or 3/4. If I was doing halves, I would use actually a different array. You can use the same array to find a half. You can split 8 equally into a half, like that. So you've got 4 and 4. But I prefer to go, when I'm doing a half, so it's 1 out of those 2, 1 out of those 2, 1 out of those 2, and 1 out of those 2. So I'm putting them in pairs of 1 out of every 2. Okay. And I'm looking at that being 4. So half of 8, visually you can see very clearly, equals 4. Okay, and pardon me, same problems again, quarters, 2/4, 3/4, but this time of 12. Again, you can see all I've done is set them up in 4s again. So you've got 4, 8, 12 circles in pairs of 4, and for a quarter, it's 1 out of every 4, which makes 3. For 2/4, it's 2 out of every 4, which equals 6. And again, that's clearly half. So you're starting to reinforce that 2/4 of any number is the same as finding a half of any number. 3/4 is 3 out of every 4, so 3, 6, 9. And again, a half of 12, setting it up as pairs of 2, so it's 1 out of every 2. You can see that half of 12 equals 6, which is the same as 2/4 of 12. Okay, and again, you just repeat the same process with 16, so 1 out of every 4 for 16, because you've got 4, 8, 12, 16, so that equals 4. A half, or 2/4 of 16 is 2 out of every 4. You can see that's 8. 3/4 of 16 is 3 out of every 4 for each column, which makes 12. And a half of 16, if you look down at the array below, it's 1 out of every 2. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Half of that equals 8. Finally, a quarter of 20. Now you can visualize splitting 20 into 2 tens and then splitting that in half. That's one way of visualizing it, but I prefer to stick to the same routines we've done before. 1 out of every 4, 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 1 out of every 4. And you can see whatever the fraction is, children can find the answer using the same model consistently regardless of what it is. Okay, 2/4 of 20. We all know 2/4 is the same as a half, so the children should go, I know it's 10, but I'm just going to show that as 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, using the 2 out of every 4. 3 out of every 4, rather than drawing the circles, all I have to do is that. So that's, instead of 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, I'm actually finding 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. 3/4 of 20 equals 15. And a half of 20 again, if I put them into parts of 2, a half is 1 out of every 2, which is 10. Your child should be able to translate that to finding things like what's a 7th of 14. All they have to do is go, well, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And if we're doing 1/7, that's 1 out of every 7. So you can see straight away, even something like that, you know, a very unfamiliar fraction like a 7th, same model, same idea, you know, putting it into parts of 7, finding 1 out of every 7, very simple, very straightforward. And the final bit, how could I find a half of 24 without drawing so many circles? Well, if I think about 24, 10 for me, 10 for you, and 4 is 2 for me, 2 for you. Okay, straight away I can see that if I'd done it by circles, I'd end up with 12 is a half. And we all know that a half of a half is a quarter, so a half of 12 is 6. And the same with 44. Again, 10 for me, 10 for you, 10 for me, 10 for you. There's my 40. And the 4 is just 2 and 2. So half of 44, very quickly, is 22. And if I want to find a quarter of 44, I can take my 44 and split it into half. That's 22 each. And then split the 22 in half to get 11 and 11. So again, a half of a half is a quarter, so a quarter of 44 is 11. I hope that's helped, it's given you a little visual, something you can work on, something you can develop, and good luck. Thank you.